Imagine saving for 5 years to finally buy the only home your kids have ever known, and 2 days before it's yours, the owner dies. Their rich kids raise the price and list it to the public. What do you do when the people with all the power choose greed over mercy? I'll tell you what I did. If you love justice served with a side of chaos, hit like and subscribe. Stay till the end. This one's petty, righteous, and exactly how karma looks in daylight. I still remember the smell of that house, a mix of lemon oil cleaners, stale cigarettes from the tiny basement tenant decades ago, and that faint, comforting smell of childhood dinners long forgotten. My best friends, let's call them Sarah and Tom, had 5 kids crammed into a leaking, adorable, falling apart 4-bedroom. They rented it for $400 a week. Not a fortune, but for that city and that time it was everything they could afford. The landlord was an old, impossibly generous woman. She'd frozen the rent for 5 years. She'd winked when Sarah joked about someday buying the place. "When you're ready, love," she said. "Just tell me." It wasn't a contract. It was trust. But it was trust wrapped in human decency, and when you're scraping every penny to feed 5 kids, that matters more than any paper. They saved. It was slow. It was humiliating. It was Saturdays barefoot in the yard with worn-out shoes, meals stretched thin, and nights when the kids slept 2 to a bed because there was no other option. But they did it. They scraped, they worked extra shifts, they counted every coin. Finally, 5 years later, they knocked on the old lady's door, hearts beating faster than they had in years. 2 days after they told her they were ready, she died. No will signed about the house sale. No official promise. Just the old woman's goodwill, and then a silence that swallowed it. Enter the villain, the 4 adult children. Each one of them was rich in a way that made my jaw clench. Property portfolios, investments, the sort of wealth that buys you a buffer against every human decency test. They told Sarah and Tom the sale would still happen. They just had to let probate run its course. "Of course," they said. "Don't worry, we'll sort it." Their voices were smooth. Too smooth. We believed them. Hell, why wouldn't we? The old woman had said it. They were family. But what they didn't say was they'd already made a decision behind closed doors. Raise the price. Put the house on the open market. Make this small family who'd been promised a quiet path to homeownership fight with market math. When the probate finished, the siblings told them the good news. Yes, sale goes through, for the price they'd agreed. Then, like a slap in the face, they submitted the papers to the bank. The loan application hit a wall. It was refused. Confused and sick, my friends asked what happened. That's when the truth leaked. The new owners had quietly raised the asking price by $80,000. They were going to list it. In 7 days. There would be an open house. The air in my chest went thin. I couldn't breathe properly. I felt cheapness crawling over me. Every hair on my arms prickling. It wasn't only about the house. It was about being betrayed by people who didn't need a dollar. Rich adults flipping a promise for petty profit. You don't mess with someone trying to hold onto a life they built piece by piece. The stakes were real. If Sarah and Tom lost it, they might never find anything big enough with affordable rent in that city. Their kids would be split up in small rooms, or worse, evicted to a cramped, worse place. It felt like watching a cliff edge widen beneath a family. I slept maybe 3 hours that week. I went from hot to cold in my thoughts. My heart was a fist. I was furious, incandescent, but also icy. I didn't want to scream. I wanted to do something surgical, precise, satisfying. Gazumping. That's what it's called when a seller accepts your offer and then sells to someone else for more money. In our state, there were anti-gazumping protections. If Sarah and Tom made a bona fide offer and paid deposit, the sellers couldn't simply take a higher one and yank the sale. That was the lever. But they were listing the house in 7 days. The problem? The bank's loan denial meant they couldn't legally lock it in fast enough. We needed to make sure no stranger offered more during that open house. We needed the house to feel, to any buyer, like a trap. A headache. An expensive headache. You have to understand. We wanted the house to feel unlivable to an outsider. But it must still leave Sarah and Tom looking like decent tenants. The devil's line to walk: sabotage the sale, not smear my friends. So we staged the worst open house in real estate history, without breaking any law. Step 1. Make the rooms feel smaller. We rearranged furniture, shoved couches into odd positions, added extra chairs, hung things in weird places. People subconsciously feel claustrophobic and assume bad layout. We borrowed motorcycle posters, rang up the rugby club for a couple of battered ornaments, and hung them in the living room, making the whole place scream lived in the wrong way. Step 2. Attack the nose. The kitchen had stink drains already. We amplified it. My friend Sarah boiled cabbage on the stove the morning of the open house until the air tasted like copper. We discreetly sprayed a tiny amount of ammonia near the front and back doors. Not enough to harm anyone, but enough to make people wrinkle their noses and whisper about weird smells. Then, the coup de grace. We poured a couple of rotten eggs down an old, sketchy drain. The smell? Sublime disaster. People turned around like they had been slapped. Step 3. Create the noisy neighborhood vibe. The next-door neighbor, who isn't on it, agreed to set up a barbecue and invite a few rough-looking friends. We called in favors. Guys with loud cars. Motorcycles. A barbecue with cheap beer. The streets suddenly felt alive in the worst way for a calm, upscale open house. People pull up, glance, and they decide quickly. Not for me. Step 4. The appearances. We moved a moldy old couch onto the neighbor's lawn with their permission and had a few large mates from the rugby club hover, laugh loudly, and talk about late-night parties. A couple of our friends drove by in beat-up cars and loops. The street looked busy, sounded rowdy, and smelled. Well, we already handled that. We didn't vandalize anything. We didn't lie. We just made the house look like a spot someone else's kids had destroyed and hadn't cared to fix. The kind of place where an investor says, ugh, permits, plumbing, no thanks. The day of the open house, I stood across the street with coffee. My palms sweated. I watched people trickle in. Some looked at the photos online, drew their breath in when they stepped into the actual place, then left. One woman sat in her car and watched the party at the neighbor's for 5 minutes, then drove off. A man, maybe a real buyer, started asking the neighbor about the drains. They clog all the time, the neighbor said, loud enough to be overheard. Roots. Smell like old pipes. They always get blocked. The buyer's face fell. He left. It was theater. It was petty. It was beautiful. At the end of the day, only 2 offers came in. One was from Sarah and Tom. They still had to stretch, but they could make a deposit. The other was a brave, wealthy buyer who offered $30,000 more. Ordinarily, the owners might have taken the extra cash and gazumped them. But because of the anti-gazumping protections and the fact my friends had legally locked their offer in, deposit paid, the owners couldn't accept the higher offer. When the owners realized that our little theater had worked, I would like to say I felt nothing but triumph. But the feeling was complicated. I remember my legs shaking. Adrenaline. A kind of sobbing laugh. I felt a weight lift off my chest, like someone had finally opened a window in a room I'd been breathing bad air in for weeks. The owners were furious the next morning. I imagined them pacing their big kitchens, counting the pocket change on their marble counters, and hating the world. Good. Let them hate. They had chosen greed over good, and now they had to live with the result. Sarah and Tom signed the paperwork that day. They put down their deposit. The kids danced around the kitchen the first night like it was Christmas morning. I watched them from the doorway and felt a tide of relief wash through me so strong, I nearly cried. It wasn't about the price anymore. It was about decency being forced back into the narrative. Afterwards, a few people asked if we'd gone too far. If we'd been petty. I'll own the petty. I'll own the theatrics. But think about what was at stake. More than money. Stability. A chance for those kids to stay in a home they'd known for years. It wasn't revenge for revenge's sake. It was justice for a family who'd been betrayed. When you've been powerless watching someone get stepped on, and you find the tiniest lever to change the balance, you use it. You make the world tilt a millimeter back in favor of the humane. The moment the sale was sealed was quieter than I expected. No dramatic gavel, no triumphant music, just a signature, a handshake, and the kids screaming in the next room as they claimed the couch like a prize. I remember the owner's messages the next day, cold, legal words filled with venom. But the look on Sarah's face when she unlocked that front door that night, the one I'll never forget, was worth every rotten egg and shouted engine. They were furious. They were powerless. We had used the rules and the human instinct to avoid bad smells to level the playing field. That's the satisfying part. You don't have to be richer than someone to beat them. Sometimes you just need to be cleverer and kinder to the people you want to protect. This isn't a story about glorifying pettiness. It's a story about protecting people who didn't have the capital to fight corporate-style greed. Sometimes justice looks messy. Sometimes it smells like rotten eggs. But when it gives a family a home, I'll take messy. If this story hit home, smash that like button and tell me in the comments, would you have done the same? And if you want more real, petty, and satisfying revenge stories, subscribe and ring that bell. I'll see you in the next one.